Philippians 4 verse 6, if you have your Bibles, please may you turn to Philippians 4 verse 6. Filippense 4 vers 6. I'm going to attempt to read this in Afrikaans. Amen. Moet oor niks besorg wees nie, maar maak in alles wat jou begeerte deur gebed en smekkend en met danksegging aan God bekend gemaak het. Amen. For those of you who didn't understand that, be anxious for nothing, for in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And that introduction right there, be anxious in or for nothing. So don't worry, don't fret. Matthew 6 tells us, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow has more things for you to be worried about than today. Just worry about today. But when you're worrying about today, don't worry about today, because the Lord will attend to your every need, just as he attends to the needs of the animals he created, and you are the crown of his creation. So with that being said, I would like to take a moment and an opportunity to welcome Pastor Carl Wilkens with us here this evening. Some of you might have seen the little trailer that was going around on WhatsApp for the advertisement for this evening's program. I would like to introduce you to him this evening, and I've had a very brief encounter. Pastor Carl Wilkens is the former ADRA director in Rwanda, and he currently operates a non-profit organization, and it's got the catchiest name that you've ever heard. All right, I want you to remember this one. It's called World Outside My Shoes. That's the non-profit that he runs. It's a self-supporting ministry. And what he does is he goes around and he educates and he talks to educators about genocide and human rights education. Something that is relevant in our society today. He was in Johannesburg at the Holocaust Center. He is going to be at the Holocaust Museum in Cape Town on Monday evening, this coming Monday evening at 6 p.m. So if you want to go see another workshop or a presentation, please reserve that in your schedule or your diary. And so his passion comes from his faith. And that's something that will be very evident in his presentation this evening. Very passionate individual. He has a wife and 3 children, if not 4. Teresa is his wife. His kids are Mindy, Sean, Lisa, and Jay. So, Pastor, I'm not too sure if you have picked up on some South African words just as yet, but I would like to say to you, how's it this evening? Which means hello, how are you? It's hello, how are you doing? All in one word. How's it? How's it going? And then further to that, I hope you have a lekker time with us this evening. All right, which means you're going to have a good time. And we don't know how long we're going to be here for, but we will speak now. So if anybody tells you now, that means it's not going to, it might be in 2 minutes' time. It might be in 2 hours' time, or it might be in 2 weeks to 2 months' time. So how's it? Hope you have a lekker time, and we'll speak now. Don't worry about that. And so you and I share something in common. Tomorrow we have the challenge to keep people's attention in church while the Springboks are playing the game. So you and I have something in common almost immediately. And my hope and prayer is that the word of God will reach the hearts of everybody during the Sabbath hours while the Springboks play their game. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Pastor Carl Wilkens up front here this evening. Thanks a lot, Pastor, for availing yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was 1978 that I first heard that term, laka. I had the opportunity as a 20-year-old college kid to volunteer at Bethel College in the Transkei. In fact, my connections this weekend here it was the Holocaust organizations in Durban, Johannesburg, and Cape Town that invited me to the country. And while I was here, I had to connect up. And fortunately, our good friends Llewellyn and Renee Juby, I'm guessing some of you may know the Jubies, they put me in touch with the community here in Cape Town. And so tomorrow morning, get to visit with the Weinberg group, and in the afternoon, the Claremont, and in the evening, Helderberg. So it's going to be fun. Looking forward to it. I want to get rolling here. This film is 40 minutes long. It's intended audience is schools, classrooms. Before, in 2004, a documentary came out about the Rwandan genocide. It's on public television in the US and on the BBC, called Ghost of Rwanda. And you could still find it. It's a tough one to watch. It's 2 hours. On YouTube, you can find it. I say it's tough because it's very much telling the story of the genocide. It's understandably graphic. It is understandably hopeless. It's a difficult watch. Since I was there during that time, I was one of the people they interviewed. And so when that film came out and teachers started using it to try to get a handle on what happened in Rwanda, and they saw this American in there, I don't know if that's 1 in 1,000 teachers, but very few in comparison to the large number that used the film, reached out and asked if I'd come talk to their kids. My wife and I, when we left Rwanda and working with ADRA, we went to Oregon, little high school there in the hills of Oregon, Milo Adventist Academy, a little Heidelberg-Sedaven sort of school. And we spent 11 years there, loved it. But we left that in 2008 and have been traveling really around the globe, not just telling stories about 94, those are the tough ones. And even in those stories, we really don't focus on the horror as much as the people who stood up against the horror. I've come to really firmly believe the horrible stories, while part of them are necessary, they don't draw people in, they drive people out. But the human stories draw people in. And so this evening, that's the theme as we tell the story of the genocide through the eyes of our family, that you will see the humanity. And afterwards, we'll have a conversation, and I'm really looking forward to talking about Rwanda today and how when things fall apart, we can piece them back together and actually have a trusting relationship again. There are just staggering stories in Rwanda, still of great grief and sorrow, but also of incredible hope and promise and joy. So I hope when you leave this evening, you will be even having more hope in your heart, because as horrible as evil can be, love can just leave it in the dust. And so there's a brief introduction at the beginning of the film. It's kind of framed on the idea that the teacher has already given the students background. This is a political event that happens in Rwanda, not an ethnic tribal event like many people have painted it. There was much more love between the group of Hutu and Tutsi than there was hatred, married by the thousands, worshiping together. But through political manipulation and the power of fear, there's no question why Jesus said, "Fear not," almost every other sentence. He understood the power of fear to drive us apart. And it is, I don't know if we have any younger ones in here, probably the first 6 or 7 minutes is where there's a little bit of graphic imagery. We felt to be true to the story. We took some news footage, but after about the first 7 minutes, there won't be any more graphic images in there. That'll probably be enough introduction. So you have it set to stream there, correct? Thanks so much, and look forward to chatting with you afterwards. I think it was really interesting in Rwanda that when people were ordered to leave, for some people, the idea of staying didn't even occur to them. And of course, the killing going on around here, the smart thing to do is get out of here. Get those who you love and safely get them out of there.
The senior rebel official said the government forces and militia were responsible for the genocide of between 500,000 and 1 million people.
I spoke to several refugees who said there aren't going to be any Tutsis left in Rwanda.
But in every situation, we have a choice. I mean, the choices might be greatly restricted. There's people who'd like to take that choice away, and sometimes we'd like to give that choice to other people. But it boils down to really we do have a choice. And lucky is the person like me who had somebody like Teresa standing next to me making that choice together. Went to Africa the first time as a college kid. Came back to the States and fell in love. So as soon as I got married with this beautiful girl, 6 weeks later we moved to Zimbabwe. Our daughters were born there, so Africa just kind of got in our blood.
You know, I didn't give a whole lot of thought to what was ahead after I say I do. I knew he was an adventurous person, and I was excited about living overseas.
When we moved to Rwanda, our first projects were to build schools, working with ADRA, Adventist Development Relief Agency.
Yeah, I met Carl Wilkens in 1990. Time he came to be director for ADRA. Someone was surprised how American young have 3 kids fast like that.
We were excited to be able to raise our kids in Africa. And Rwanda, like other countries we had been in, was very welcoming. The neighborhood kind of took our kids in as neighborhood kids.
The kids would go to school. Carl would do his work. I'd take the kids swimming, and on birthdays, we'd go camping. So it was very normal for us. We were pretty much untouched by the conflicts that were simmering underneath.
And we had 2 Rwandans working in our home, Janvier, the night watchman, and Anita, who not only worked in our home, but she lived with us. And so Anita just proved to be a really kind, thoughtful, she was great with the kids.
She would stay with us through the week. We had a room in our house with a separate entrance, and we grew to love her very much, like part of our family.
Beginning in about January 1994 is when we started to pick up the undertones of unrest. I was the person who was supposed to bring the Rwandan and Tutsi militaries together for various dialogues, and you got a sense that there was a tension between them. Some of it you'd expect, but other aspects of it, you knew that there was something unsettling.
We didn't know the word genocide in the months before, but we could tell there was a lot of tension, and there were rumors of pickup trucks with machetes coming in. And then there were massacres, 50 people, 20 people, 100 people. You know, I started to find out some of my workers were Hutu and some were Tutsi. Up until that point, I actually didn't know who was who, and they worked together in a way that wouldn't indicate that there was a problem.
There was enough of a counterbalance of those who wanted to see peace succeed that everyone thought that any of those attempts to foil the peace would fail. Of course, all of that was proven wrong when the plane was shot down, and then in the next 24 hours there was a carefully orchestrated plan that was executed.
What's going on here, huh? We got all the kids in the hallway and the television. This is April 7, and we're watching TV in the hall. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were woken up at about 5 5:15, 5:20, by a lot of gunfire and stuff. The day after the plane was shot down, there was slaughter going on at an orphanage to the east, and we were talking on our ham radio with them, and they reported people coming onto their campus and people being killed there at the orphanage, and they were begging us to get help. Please send the UN. And so I managed, after quite a few attempts, to get the UN on the phone. UN guy was really shook up, and he said they had lost control of the airport. And I'm like, what do you mean you lost control of the airport? You know, how does the UN lose control of the airport?
I remember looking across, seeing groups of mostly probably young guys. They'd be carrying sticks or machetes. They'd be moving in groups of 6 or 8, probably going from one house to another. And it was very horrifying to think of what was happening.
People starting moving around. What's going on? After noon, there's a soldier from Chikondo, from our area, must kill all the troops. That military who came, he put it for machete. That day he killed that young boy. Wow.
The term Interahamwe is a Kinyarwandan term. I believe it means something like those of us who work there. And they managed to work the idea that if they didn't kill all the Tutsi, they would be enslaved by the Tutsi. And that they were fighting in self-defense, that this was a duty of all Rwandan Hutu citizens. And that's how they were able to mobilize everybody to this very twisted collective insanity.
Towards the end of that first day of killing, a gang actually gathered at our gate. We didn't know about this until the next morning, but we found out that our neighbor ladies had come out, stood between the gates, stood in front of these guys with clubs and machetes, and they said, no, you can't go into our house. They started telling stories about our family, doing little acts of kindness. Basically, they said their kids play with our kids. We were shocked to find out that we had been targeted, but then even more amazed at the courage of these ladies. They risked their lives for us.
My first and only priority in many ways was finding out where every single American was and how we would get them safely out.
So it probably would be Friday evening. Teresa and I would start making the decision about what we're going to do, and especially about Anita and Janvier, who were targeted because of their Tutsi ID cards. The embassy had made it really clear that Rwandans could not be evacuated in the convoy, that would put everybody at risk. And so that option was out. Thinking that they could stay and barricade themselves in the house, nah, the house would be broken into and they would be slaughtered. And so really, there just didn't seem like many options, except if, I was able to stay, perhaps my presence would stop the militia. There was a huge respect for foreigners in Rwanda, a real valuing of foreigners.
His personality, his heart was such that there was no other option because he saw people suffering and he can't just leave it and not do anything about it. For me, it's a matter of, can I stand with that?
My parents were visiting at the time, and I was really glad my dad could drive the family out so Teresa could be with the kids, but still.
I think Carl recognized it was a hard decision, not just for him, but yet we could be looking at the possibility of never seeing each other again.
The harder part of this decision was her part, definitely. Much, much tougher. For her to leave with the kids.
And I know at that point in time, his thinking was, and I agreed totally. I knew as ADRA director, he's there for not just the development aspect, but for the relief aspect too. He's been already working in these camps. And so it just seemed that it wouldn't be right not to stay. The right thing to do is to stay.
I'll never forget standing by our bedroom window, looking out at the city, which is built on hills there in Kigali, and holding her and thinking, this is what it's come to, and this is the right thing to do. And so I'm on the radio now, and I was telling Laura at the embassy, I'm sending my wife and family to the American ambassador's home over. She says, what do you mean you're sending them? We're all leaving, everybody, shredding documents, locking the doors, everybody leaving over. And I said, no, I'm not leaving. It kind of paused, and you don't have a choice. And yes, I do have a choice. And you can see this going back and forth. And finally she says, okay, then I need you to sign on a piece of paper that you've refused the help of the United States government to leave Rwanda.
And I remember thinking how incredibly hard of a decision that must have been to be separated from his wife and kids and make the decision to stay. He had the opportunity, because he had an American passport in his hand, to leave the country and find safety. And instead, he was choosing to stay and let the people that he loved the most in this world go on overland without him.
In leaving, I did feel like, we were abandoning him. And though he tells me he never felt abandoned, I just, when we're all leaving and you're leaving someone behind, you do get that sense that you're abandoning them.
A beautiful sunny day. This is Tuesday, and nobody can believe what is hidden by this beautiful sunny day. Here you can see is the corner of our yard. This house over here is just on the other side of the street. You can see the hole in their metal roof from where a small rocket landed this morning.
There was a 24/7 curfew. The government said nobody is allowed out of their house. The only people on the streets were the people who were doing the slaughter. The pastor and his wife, who had joined me, she would buy stolen food or propane bottle over the fence. It was a survival time, those 3 weeks. How can we get enough food and water just to survive?
Electricity went off yesterday, and it's so... Come in, Ma.
During those first 3 weeks, there were several incidents when soldiers came, wanted to know who was there. I mean, there was this time that we actually paid off the militia about $100 to save the lives of the people in our house. You just did what you had to do. Each threat, each challenge that came.
Fluffy doesn't seem to be bothered by the shooting. And Poacher up there, he's just looking all around, and what's up? That seems too close. Now here's the whole bedroom radio station.
So I think it was about the second week of the genocide that, it was really sinking in on me. I might not see my family again. I started thinking, I gotta leave some sort of record. And so I found some old medical lecture tapes that I'd gotten from my brother and started recording over these tapes what was happening.
Okay, this is Sunday morning, April 24, and should have a radio contact here with Teresa very soon.
I remember listening for her voice. There'd be static on the radio and stuff, and then I'd hear this sweet voice come over the radio. 7676, this is Tango Whiskey, do you copy? And I'd push the button and go, yes, Tango Whiskey, this is 76, go ahead.
Initially, when he wasn't out and able to move around, we'd talk for a long time. I think maybe up to a couple hours.
I would ask her at different times, are you still okay with the decision? Is everything really all right? And trying to sense from 1,000 miles away through a staticky radio how she's doing. And she always just came back to me rock solid, like, yes, absolutely. Usually we'd talk once in the morning and then again late at night when he got back. And no matter what the newspapers were saying, no matter what the newscasts were saying, I'd hear all kinds of reports about the horrible things that were going on. But just to know that he was doing okay and that he came back safe every night was huge. Eventually, an announcement came over the national radio. The government was giving permission for people to come out and get a travel document, a laissez-passer. And so when I heard that word over the radio, I thought, okay, this is our chance. Because during that 3-week time, I was thinking, okay, I stayed to hopefully save the lives of these two people. There's got to be more. The morning I actually left the house, I remember thinking, we've developed a routine, and this sort of feels like there's security here within the fence of our yard in our house. And now I'm venturing out, and I wasn't sure what I would find out there. I had talked on the radio to the Red Cross. I knew the killing was still going on. So yeah, it was with a lot of uncertainty that I ventured out that first day. It was great to have Pastor Soraya along. I really counted on his advice. And then to have Dawson, one of my ADRA guys. We had been through tough scrapes already. Backing the car down the driveway, I knew the first roadblock was less than 100 yards away. Fortunately, it was a neighbor, the tailor man, who was there. Strange to see him, instead of at his sewing machine, having a machine gun in his hand. But he wasn't too difficult. But there was another roadblock we came up to, and they were shouting, "Belge, Belge," as we drove there. You know, they saw a white guy in the car, and I guess thought I was Belgian. And I said, no, I'm an American. I'm not Belgian. And the guy says, good. You know, there was a rumor going around that Belgians had shot the plane down. He says, because if you were a Belgian, and he kind of draws his knife across his throat and laughs, and says, this is what would happen to you. And, you know, as we wandered through some of the neighborhoods, it was really strange. They were deserted like ghost towns. I remember this one guy sitting on a couch. They drug it out next to the street, and he had an old like shotgun across his lap and a monkey on a leash. And there were little kids who were playing with Westerner toys at a few places. I'm sure they hadn't seen those toys before. And, you know, stuff was drug out of houses and on the streets. It was apocalyptic. It was just really like a whole different world. Finally, we made it to the office of the government headquarters. And as we were waiting there, I saw a man walk in with a military uniform. Guy had a real presence about him, greeted people as he walked around. And as he came and talked to us, I introduced myself. I explained that ADRA was still there. You know, not that we had much, but we wanted to help any way we could. And he said, well, yeah, there are some groups of orphans that are needing help. I can send you with my social affairs man to visit these orphanages, and you can see what you can do. It was strange that this man actually ended up giving me my marching orders. He's the one who, to a large degree, determined what I did for the remainder of the genocide. And he quickly put together the document I needed, the travel permit, signed it and stamped it. And I walked out of the office with this paper that was going to be so crucial to moving around the city. The first time I drove into Gasimba Orphanage there with Colonel Renzajo's assistant, I saw these little bumps in the parking lot in the dirt, you know, they're fresh mounds. And I said to Damas, the director of the orphanage, I said, are those graves? And yeah, they were graves. They were of children, orphans who had died not from the active slaughter, but died of diarrhea, dysentery. There was no question we had to get water to the kids, but how are we going to do it? And who's going to help me? And I can't imagine doing this without my two ADRA men, Dawson and Gasigua.
That's when he came to my home. So he told me, Wilkens is still in here. Oh, that's good. How? He's working. He wants you to go to work. Oh, that's good. That's good news.
That was definitely a regular part of every time I got out of my house, get water to the orphans, get water to the orphans. And in between, try to find some food, try to find some medicine. The fighting sometimes was so intense, I couldn't venture out. But each time I was pinned down in the house, I would picture these kids with their little metal cup. You know, they would line up when I got there with water just for one cup of water. The dependability of Dawson and Gasigua during this tough time was just amazing. And you know, both of those guys had people in their homes. Gasigua had more than 40 people that came looking for protection.
People to come to my home. You are coming. There's nothing, what can I do? I open, especially kids.
And he said when the Interahamwe would come to the place, he would give them a chicken. I mean, he had this little chicken farm, and he'd give them a chicken, like a chicken for a life. And as I got out and I started to meet both the players in terms of those orchestrating the killing, but then also meeting people like Damas at Gasimba Orphanage with his 80 that eventually grew to more than 400. You started to see places where opportunities where you could make a difference. So Teresa would send some money through the UN, and from the UN to me, and from me to some of the killers who were in charge of the downtown section of the city. They were my bank, and they would change the money to local currency. And then through some ladies at the market, I found out thieves who had a stash of powdered milk, and I'd make a deal and buy powdered milk from them. But then I couldn't take all the powdered milk from them to my house. They'd rob me. To the orphanage, they'd rob me. So I would take the powdered milk to Renzaho's office, who gave me storage space there. And it was a network of thieves and killers who helped me to supply the orphanage, and even the colonel providing storage space. Pretty bizarre.
I got here in late May, and by that time, most of the killing in the city was pretty well over, but there was still a lot of fighting. And there were a lot of areas where we found it very difficult to travel. And Carl's voice would come over the radio in the middle of the night, reporting in from these places that we were afraid to travel. And we just couldn't understand how he was able to get from place to place to check on his orphans, as he did every day, and still live. He went through the worst areas of town. And when I say worst, it was unimaginable, thinking back on it. I tried going through some of them in the daytime, usually with escorts and armed people with me, and still it was frightening. You'd be surrounded by craved people with death in their eyes, with all sorts of hideous weapons, homemade usually, clubs with nails. I still don't understand how he survived, or how he was able to do the things he did. Most of our people were just absolutely astounded at his courage and at his success.
There's this one water story, I still shake my head when I think about it. We had managed to come up with some barrels from a factory. I think they were syrup or something. They were gunky. They needed to be cleaned out. And the water point was just clogged with hundreds of people. So asking them, excuse me, while I clean these barrels, it was like, that's not going to work. And somebody pointed out that there was a faucet, a water tap down the road a couple hundred yards. And I said, well, won't there be long lines there? They said, well, there's sometimes sniper fire there, but you could check it out. And so I thought, well, I went down kind of cautiously. Sure enough, there were kids there filling up their own water jugs, and they all gathered around. Mzungu, Mzungu, that's what they would call foreigners. What are you doing? And there was one older boy among them who spoke French, and so I could communicate with him. And I explained I needed to wash these barrels. And these kids all volunteered to jump in. And actually, we formed an assembly line. And one little one put her hands in a funnel shape over the hole and top of the barrel. And someone else would pour some sand in, and someone some water. Not too much water. We don't want it too heavy. And they would roll it up a little hill and back down, slosh it around. Someone else would pour it out, glug, glug, glug. And then machine gun fire tore at the metal roof above us, and we all dove for cover. And I'm thinking, this thing can't go on like this. Somebody's going to get hurt, The kid was the leader. He's like, no, just hold on. It'll be calm. And his influence really did have an impact on the other kids. And after a little bit, it calmed down, and back to your stations. And for probably 2 hours, I worked with these kids cleaning all of my barrels so I could haul water. And boy, it was hot and could have been just miserable work, but those kids made a game out of it.
This kind of experience, I think it could have just killed me inside, as you saw so much killing and the suffering and of the little kids, especially working with orphans. Down the street here, we were always concerned about their safety. One day a mortar landed in the front yard and it killed one. And the second one just took most of her shoulder off. So angry, you just want to kill someone yourself as you're trying to change the dressing on this little 3-year-old shoulder. You're peeling the gauze back, and she's trying to be brave, and yet she's crying. You're so angry at people, but then you see the courage in this little kid's face, and they're ready to just keep on. They're never going to give up. And so, like the kid's never going to give up, then you can never give up. And you just have to you keep going.
A lot of people see the same concern as the people in Rwanda, but not just anybody was willing to take the risk. I thought, well, part of it is that your personality doesn't shy away from things like this, as a lot of the rest of us do.
Roger, Roger.
So anyway, I knew it was more than just your interest in taking risks.
guess one of the things that when you talk about the adventure element here is I like a lot of different things. There's no question about adventure and things that I guess some people would think are dangerous. The difference with this situation here is it's just no games, and there is real pain. I don't know any deeper pain that we have here on this earth that people are going through right now, and that I experience kind of, I don't know if you'd say vicariously or whatever. The stakes are real. No blanks are being shot.
Time had gone on, and you thought this is going to end. It's got to end. But it went day after day, week after week, eventually month after month. And still looked like there was no end in sight. And fear was so real, especially the first days. You don't want to die. You love your wife. You love your kids. You want to be reunited with them. But fear would stop you from doing what God wanted you to do. And so if you ask him, he overcomes that fear. So you say, okay, Lord, if I die today, you love my wife and kids more than me. You know how to take care of them better than I ever could. I want to be the one to do it, but I'll trust you. And once you kind of give up like that, the sting and the nastiness of fear is gone. And so many of us, me, everybody, we get sidetracked at times and we make these choices that are really destroying ourselves, destroying our brothers and our sisters. But when you choose to look for the right way in making decisions and in taking actions and doing something, you know there's a reason to be on earth. And you know that the whole world just hasn't gone crazy as it looked like here in this country.
One of the toughest days of the genocide started out just kind of ordinary tough. Tikwa and I were trying to get water out to the orphans. We took our truck to the water source and filled our barrels with water and then headed towards the orphanage. And as we came in the gate, the young brother of the director, Jean-Francois, came out and he says, well, you're coming today as an answer to prayer. They were here yesterday, and the last day or two, they had killed about 6 people at the orphanage. And they had just given the message the day before that they would come back the next day and kill everybody. They said, we don't care Hutu or Tutsi. Everybody here needs to get out or get killed. He's not even finished telling me the story. And all of a sudden, around us, we start to see them materialize. Some start to come in the main gate. Others are coming through the hedges.
So Interham was crossing around it for that orphanage. Time we see Carl Wilkens starting talking to each other. What's that Muzungu doing here?
This was the beginning of what became between 2 and honestly, I can't remember, 2-3 hour standoff. The militia just didn't move. They kind of positioned themselves all around the orphanage, but as long as I was there, they seemed not to be coming in.
Kids was inside, they was afraid, they was crying, there was many people inside, the mothers and the fathers who hiding there.
I saw their leader drive by once. I saw him walk by another time. I said to Gasikwa, siphon the water out of the barrels into the reservoir as slow as you can. We got to make this process drag on as long as we can. But eventually Gasikwa was finished.
And Indiaram was still there. That's wanted to move there. Waiting for Carl Wilkens to go. And the Carl Wilkens also that's wanted to go.
I remember talking, Mama Papa Zero, that was the UN humanitarian. Mama Papa Zero, this is Adra 1. Come in and yes, Adra 1, go ahead. And then my radio started beeping, indicating the battery is about dying. And I knew that they couldn't come really to my help. I mean, they couldn't get to that part of the city anyway. But I was just calling for whoever. I talked to Philip at the Red Cross, come in. And Philip came in and says, hey, the director, Damas, is here in my office. I said, well, good. Don't let him come back here. They're looking for him. And eventually, Philip was able to get a hold of the police, the gendarmes. And what kind of brought a pause in this standoff was a pickup truck load with 7 gendarmes come in the driveway. And their lieutenant gets out of the cab, looks around, military guy, used to sizing things up. And he comes to me. I introduced myself. I said, thank you for coming. Can you spend the night with the orphans? No, we're too outnumbered. Listen, this is, he's a man of action. This is what we got to do. He says, I'll stay here with my men, but you need to get us reinforcements. At this point, the young brother, Jean-Francois, says, no, don't go, Wilkens. As soon as you go, they're going to kill us. Please don't go. And he starts to kind of get teary and don't go. And I'm looking at the lieutenant. Can I trust this lieutenant? You know, because some of the police had joined in massacres. So is this guy just wanting to get rid of me and he'll join the militia for this massacre? Or will he honestly stand there and hold them off? And I decided to trust him. I mean, it was a hard decision. I felt sick to my stomach. I felt like I was going to vomit. Am I just trying to save my own skin, you know, or is this really the right thing to do? Trust this lieutenant, move forward. And I said, listen, Jean-Francois, I will go get help. If I don't get help, I'll come back myself. I will come back. And it just seemed like a pretty weak thing I was leaving him with, a weak promise. But I left. I thought, man, they could stop me at the roadblock right outside the orphanage and kill me there. Or maybe I'm going to hear gunfire as I leave. And, well, I didn't. I went to the colonel's office. And I knew he was out of town already, but I still went to his office. And I found the secretary there. And the secretary says to me, as if it's good news, well, no, the colonel's not here. The prime minister's here. Well, they had killed the prime minister the second day of the genocide. And the extremists put in their own prime minister. And so the secretary's telling me, ask the prime minister for help. And I'm like, what? This is the one who's in charge of the genocide. Why would I ask this person? This just made no sense at all to me. But there's a lot of stuff that wasn't making sense. The prime minister, Kambanda was his name, came down the hallway. He's got a whole little entourage with him, and they're coming down the hall. I step out in the middle of the hall, kind of, stopping them, put my hand out, introduce myself. I'm Carl Wilkens, the director of ADRA. And he goes, oui, je te connais. This is going on in French. I know you, he says, and how's your work going? And I'm like, well, it's not going good. In fact, at Gasimba Orphanage, there's a massacre that's about to happen if it hasn't happened already. I just kind of blurted it out, and turns, talks, and he says, yeah, after talking with his guys, we know about this situation. Those orphans are going to be okay. And kind of like, oh, okay. Thank you. And I shake hands and moves on down the hall, kind of leaves me stunned there. And I don't know any other reason except this guy. He stopped the massacre. A couple days later, we were able to get the orphans moved out of that really horrible situation to a less horrible situation. And it just amazed me that this man who later will be convicted of genocide is helping me save the lives of these orphans.
When I think back to those days and try to remember as vividly as I can what happened, the strongest memory I have is of this deep, gnawing fear that just kind of ate away at your bowels every day. You'd wake up to the sound of gunfire. In the night, you'd hear the dogs fighting over the corpses. In the daytime, if you moved around the city, there was a smell of death everywhere. What made it possible to keep going was the sense that it would end. One day, it would end. And I can remember the day it ended very clearly. Went from a night of almost complete gunfire all night and quite a few near misses to silence. Sudden and frightening silence. And it was almost a day before we heard the first tentative sounds of life coming back. People timidly coming out of the Amahoro Stadium or crawling up from whatever holes they'd been hiding in, looking around, speaking quietly.
When the genocide ended, when the RPF drove the extremists out of power and out of the country, that first night was really quiet. It was almost hard to sleep. It was so quiet. And then it was just a few days before I was able to leave, climb into this Canadian C-130 and fly to my family to meet up with Therese and the kids. And I remember touching down in Nairobi and trying to see out the window of this kind of cargo transport plane and stretching, where's my family? And actually not expecting to see them until I went through some sort of immigration or something. And I was so surprised when they let down the steps, of this cargo plane, and I came down and looked, and there was Teresa and the kids right there on the tarmac a few hundred feet away, and ran to them, and the kids running towards me, and down on my knees hugging and kissing, and up with Teresa and hugging and kissing. And
seeing that plane coming in, landing, and then watching him come towards us, kids running toward him. It was really amazing, more than what we'd been dreaming about all the days and nights before as it led up to that. I remember Mindy saying, "Dad, you need a haircut." And of course for me, just hugging him and realizing, how he's a lot thinner than 3 months before. It was a really good reunion. It took some time to absorb the idea that, hey, this finally has ended, but it just was exciting to have him back.
Just incredible memories of the beginning of like a whole new world, a whole new life. By many people's standards, I should have been slaughtered with those 800,000 other people who were slaughtered during this time, but I wasn't. I'm alive, and now I get to see my kids grow up and at their high school and college graduation, and it was whole new appreciation for life. Fortunately, Anita and Janvier survived. They've both gotten married. They have children. Interestingly, Janvier joined the military and has actually done 2 tours of duty in Darfur, standing up against genocide there in the Sudan. And Anita has 2 beautiful sons, wonderful husband. Tragically, she lost nearly everybody in her family. A little brother who was out of the country and a sister hiding in a convent survived, but parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, gone.
I remember, talking on the open line back to European Command and to the State Department about Carl's decision, and many of the folks saying, did you accurately convey the situation? Does he understand, truly understand the decision he's making? And I remember, saying back to them, he does. And that is why he's staying, because he believes if he keeps a presence there, if he keeps that mission open, that he can make a difference. I really wished, in hindsight, that we could have done the same thing at the American Embassy. And it is probably my greatest regret that we didn't keep the embassy open. At the time, policymakers said it was better to close the embassy down. Looking back now, boy, what a world of difference we could have made if we would have maintained that American presence.
Myself, who was fighting each other, is my brothers, he was there, sister there, but no one helped. But Carl Wilkens got to help some people, help the orphanage. And I saw he changed my life many things until now. To do good things, better than to do wrong things. I saw people never help one another, and it was very painful my heart until now. How people ran, how people died, no help one another, kill someone, no do anything wrong. It changed my life.
good?
Yep.
I won't get everybody, but
My friend Gasikwa, I never get tired of that line where he says, he's here. That's good news. In the midst of these dark things, dark times, you're looking for something a bit positive, optimism, some sort of hope. So I think it was an 8th grade girl back in Michigan last school year. She was saying, how did you find hope? And I said, hope is not logical. Hope is not linear. It is kind of like nuclear. I mean, it's this one tiny little morsel and life comes again. And, for Teresa and I, we made this promise when we said goodbye. I listened to Laura just talking there and saying, yeah, he knew what the decision was he was making. And I look back at that 25 years ago and I go, did I? I mean, it was really clear, couldn't have made the decision without Teresa. The idea that our family had expanded and, it wasn't a situation where Teresa, was kind of at one place with the kids and the Rwandans were some other place. And it was like, what about me and the kids? Teresa never did that. She saw it as our family and not dividing the family, but how can the family support the family? Does that sound like humanity? That we are all one race, a human race, and not choosing one family member over another? Every family member is of equal value. I'm excited to, and by the way, I meant to say earlier, thanks. If some of you are wondering, why are we watching a film when the guy's here? I think you understand. I wanted you to hear my wife's voice. I wanted you to hear all the other voices. And to be honest, you're the 5th group I've met with today. And it's easier to let the film tell the story, and then we can have a conversation about that time, about the choices, about the relationships. Pastor Soraya and his wife who were there, he was the union treasurer, an incredible man of wisdom and depth. I was back to Rwanda this year. Oh my goodness, actually 6 times. And guess it's not in this folder. Maybe it's in this folder. Here they are. Pastor Soraya and his wife are now retired in Rwanda. And we were heading off to church Sabbath morning last April. And she came down the stairs with that beautiful blue dress. And I go, Ma, you're stunning. You're like the morning sunrise. And she looks at me with this little twinkle in her eye. She says, that's because I am. Her humor did us so well to diffuse situations. They came to the gate to kill the people, and she would go there and talk to them like they were her sons or nephews or something. I don't know if you know any couple who's been married for a long time and they might appear to be a little bit tired of each other's humor. I don't know if that rings any bells, but he just adores her humor. He adores everything about her. What would you like to talk about? 94, and then I hope before we take off this evening, we can talk some about Rwanda today. Each time I go back, new stories of people reframing the other, new stories of people not defining each other by their worst moments, not defining them by 1994, but allowing people to reinvent themselves. I got a whole slew of stories and theories. You know, I was with the kids there at the American International School today, and yesterday, actually 2 days, and then a couple of schools in Johannesburg. And I'm often, I don't know if I can do it with this water bottle if it won't leak, but I'm often asking students, how does somebody go from kind and generous to murderous? And is it possible, you can't go back, is it possible to go forward to trust it again? And which one is tougher, to go from generous to murderous or to go from murderous back to trust it again? Most of the people go with this first one. But there are 3 boys at King's College in Johannesburg this week who raised their hand for going from murderous to trust it again. And I asked one of the boys, why? And he said, well, if we were made with a heart that's good or kind, we're going back to where we were made. And I said, really interesting. Then he went on and he says, you know, maybe when they weren't killing, they were good people. And I'm like, you know what you just said. But he was talking about the complexity and the potential that we all have within us. So, do you have any questions or comments or thoughts you'd like to explore in a conversation this evening? Usually takes one person to break. Thank you.
I believe that Rwanda is now one of the model countries of Africa as far as development. Leaders in many spheres, and they're doing very well. Huge growth potential. It seems that they've put everything behind them and they're sort of just carrying on. Is this the sign of hope for the rest of Africa? That's one of the exceptions because they have strong leaders.
So his question is, it seems like Rwanda has become a model, and have they, if they've put all of this behind them, you know, is that hope for the rest of Africa? Or then you mentioned about a strong leader. Like anywhere in the world, you are going to have people who are still stuck in the pain of the past. And you're going to have other people who are just incredibly free and hopeful and optimistic and building relationships. And then you got a whole bunch in between. It's a spectrum. It's a journey. It's true physically. I actually wish I had that picture without me in it, but it's the only one I have right now. That skyscraper scene. I mean, the manicured field. I was thinking the other day, Kigali's like the cleanest city I've ever seen. And I was thinking the other day, what about a kid coming from the rural areas of Rwanda, and then he comes to Kigali and he's blown away. The skyscrapers, the traffic lights, the traffic and everything, you know, the robots. Thanks. They've got little don't walk, no walk little men who are like little stick figures. I don't know if you've been in any countries that have that walk and don't walk. And I'm thinking, I'll bet you that kid thinks every city in the world is that clean until he leaves. Leadership is a big part. There's no question. And he's not a leader without conflict. Very authoritarian, and yet people are experiencing security and progress and a voice. You know, it's actually, I don't have a proper label for his leadership because I feel it's very different from many things. In some ways, it seems to fit in this pigeonhole, but in other ways, it doesn't. And, you know, you've got a parliament in Rwanda. They voted they made their new constitution that 30% of the parliament have to be women in Rwanda. That's the law. The other 70%, men and women, are competing, and women now have half of that. 63% of the parliament in Rwanda are women. So when you talk about rebuilding trust and the role, and not just the parliament, all decision-making bodies, wardens of prisons, you know, they work for a minimum of a third. That's their goal in all decision-making bodies. So the rebuilding does have a very intentional, focused leader. I was actually back in Rwanda on kind of a surprise trip a week ago today. I had started my tour here in South Africa and was in Durban when I got an invitation. I got the opportunities. I never knew when I decided to stay in Rwanda what all would come from that decision. But last Friday, I had the opportunity to speak to all 600 of the top leaders in Rwanda, the government, the ministers, present and former, spouses included, senators, parliamentarians, governors of provinces, mayors of districts. It was around, I kind of hesitated to put this picture, but I will. It's because it's not about me. It's about the choices we make. And let me just dive right into this. Okay, let's frame it this way. Sorry, camera guy, I don't want to be difficult, but students often ask me, how can you believe in God after going through a genocide? And it's a super valid question. If you believe in an all-powerful and all-loving being, and then you see genocide, it's like, well, shoot, I'm not anywhere near God, but if I had the power to stop genocide, you know, if I had the power to rescue children and women and families, that's very understandable logic and thinking. If you don't frame it within the framework of a God who values free choice above anything else. Because up there with that air of free choices, you can have a level of love, a form of love that is unlike any other love that anybody has. It is not a love of coercion. It is not a love of guilt. It is not a love of duty. It is a love of sheer adoration, of being attracted in a way that you cannot choose anything. That kind of love only, I believe, exists in an environment of complete free choice, where people are free to love and people are free to commit genocide. So what difference does God make? I think that sometimes, as I was growing up in the Adventist church with the fabulous stories of Joseph and, you know, Daniel, David, Esther for such a time as this, while those stories really have people, real people, and God working through real people, somehow the message came out that the real miracles were the ones you couldn't explain with any human explanation. And I don't doubt that those kind of miracles happen, but I think not most of the time. Most of the time, it's like those neighbor ladies who stood in front of our house and told stories to the guys who were intent on killing us. They told enough stories, they triggered enough pathways in their brains that somehow they reframed our family that night through stories small acts of kindness our kids plan with their kids. So is it possible that God's most powerful evidence of love and power is through people like those ladies? Because if it was more often some invisible, unexplainable God force that we could focus on a problem, then the next problem that comes along, we're trying to somehow get that God force over there. But if God impacts somebody like those ladies to stand up, or somebody like Gasikwa to, when the neighbors come to kill the people in his house, they've had this hate radio, this radio Milkaline that was going on for a couple of years before the genocide, sending the messages out, kind of like metaphorical bricks through the radio waves about negative messages about Tutsis. And people like Gasikwa just chucked those bricks aside. But other people started to build a wall with those bricks between them and the other until they couldn't see the neighbor anymore. And then Gasikwa comes bursting through that metaphorical wall with kindness, with chickens. And you see the power of God. And you go, wow, if that man with a few chickens could do that, what could I do? And there's hope. And so when I had a chance to speak last Friday night to all of these and to meet the president, and I was with two other Rwandans that they were recognizing work for building unity and stuff. I'm like, what do I say to them? And I talked to them about, they were there all day long, the whole government, more or less, examining unity and reconciliation. National strategies, 25 years later, still national strategies, local strategies. And I said, maybe the best way I could say thank you for this award is to tell you a personal strategy. And that is, how do we see the other? How do we frame the other? I'll dig into some of that a little later, I guess, if you want to. But I think the hope is in our ability. First off, what Rwanda did was they provided security. And then recognizing the needs, everybody was suffering after the genocide. Perpetrator, survivor, everybody was suffering from that. And the government made options available for people. This was last summer with a lady, Maria. She was 35 at the time of the genocide, 7 children. She and her husband made the difficult decision to split up. They were Tutsi, hoping that they could at least save some of their children, because as a group of 9, they had very little hope of surviving. And their strategy worked for her and the girls, not for him and the boys. The guy standing next to her, Filbert, was 19. Filbert confessed to killing in the genocide. Filbert and Maria were part of the group that was chosen in one neighborhood where the government would supply roofing sheets and cement, and the people would supply, make adobe bricks, build the houses, do the labor and everything. They tried to avoid each other at the beginning of the work, understandably. She talked about how hard it was to even see him because, I didn't go into the full detail. He was in the gang that killed her husband and sons. You would not believe the way they interact today. And part of us, we have such strong pathways in our brain that we think, that is just not right. Nobody can do that. Nobody can do that. But they had security, they had opportunities to have shared experiences, and I've been super excited lately about the potential that we have of forming new neural pathways. I'm always telling kids, what's 7 times 7? And they fire out. You don't remember. Yeah, you don't forget that. You learn that so much. 12 times 12, 144. 18 times 18. Yeah. We didn't learn that pathway. But I tell you 324, and you have that pathway now, the beginning of that tiny pathway. And they say that the more we fire it, the coating on the outside of it becomes slicker and stronger. 18 times 18 is 324, and that pathway gets. Now, you probably won't say that again, and you'll probably forget it, which is really cool, the way the brain's, because it can't have a pathway for every single thing. But the ones we continue to fire can develop. Maria started to fire new pathways about Filbert, beginning when he showed her where her husband and sons were buried. She wanted to know, because many people in Rwanda would go ahead and dig them up and give them an appropriate, a respectful burial. Dig them out of the pit latrine or wherever the mass grave where they might be. Part of that process of saying goodbye. Part of the process of not having their legacy robbed by genocide. Every time you think of your husband and sons and you only think they were killed in the genocide, and you forget their beauty, their humor, their creativity, the master speller that this little boy was. You forget so much if it's all stolen by the genocide. And so that process of giving people safety, security, and opportunities for shared experiences not only led Maria and Filbert to build a whole new set of neural pathways when they saw each other, but she actually invited Filbert to the wedding of her daughter. That would have been enough. That would have been more than enough for most of us, but not Maria. She asked him to be the MC. A Rwandan colleague this week, wait, he might not have been from Rwanda. Anyway, an African colleague this week, he said often the MC is almost like in place of the father at some of these weddings. And I thought, are you kidding me? I was sitting in the room with my students from Chicago this summer when Marie and Filbert were telling their story. I did not like Filbert, I'll be honest. Filbert did not seem repentant. Filbert he seemed so simplistic in his definition of bad time between Hutus and Tutsis. I asked him, didn't you have any Tutsi friends? Because like I said in Rwanda, they married each other so much that it was like hard to find somebody who didn't have an aunt of one ethnic group or a cousin of another. No, he didn't. And his clothes looked nicer than the other people. Some of the survivors in there looked like threadbare clothes, and he had there's just nothing I liked about Filbert, I'll be honest. But Maria was like unbelievable. I said, Maria, I'm thinking like your family. Didn't people get upset when you invited him to the wedding? I'm not even thinking about Filbert being in the room right now when I'm asking that question. I've just kind of, in fact, for the picture, I asked for a picture with Maria. I didn't ask for a picture with Filbert. And Filbert kind of got in the picture, and I looked over, and I'll be honest. I mean, it's kind of silly, but it's really embarrassing. I figured I could just do this and crop him out. The reason it's embarrassing is because I'm thinking that with my hand around this woman who has, in her mind, Filbert has been born again. He is not the same person. I went away so challenged by her. I mean, I've wrestled with anger already, and I thought I've dealt with a lot of anger over the 25 years. But this summer, when I came face to face with Filbert, I just defined him by 1994 all over again. All those horrible things, the torture and the rape, and I couldn't see past that. But because of Maria, I was forced to look farther, to look deeper. And I said, Maria, I'm thinking about your family. Weren't they upset that you invited him? And she smiles patiently at me and she says, yeah. And I'm like, so, you could have just left him in the corner. Why'd you make him the MC? And she goes, because it was my home. And I'm like, what? The more I thought about that, it was her grief. It was her loss. It was her loneliness. It was her sorrow. And I would never challenge any of the way she handles that. Why was it bothering me so much? The way she was handling her freedom. Freedom from anger and bitterness. I was due back in Rwanda a month later with a group of teachers. I was there a couple times this summer. We went to the same place, and I knew we were going to hear Maria and Filbert again. But in the meantime, a couple of things. You know, I journal. I hated writing when I was a kid, but in 1998, some of you older ones might remember, they did it around the world, this thing called Net 98. Dwight Nelson did meetings, and he came out one night in 1998 with a stack of journals, his prayer journals. And in 1998, I started writing scripture. I think Dwight was writing scripture in red and his thoughts to God in blue, his letter to God. And I started doing that. And I'm still, I guess that's 20 years ago. I am still journaling, especially when I'm struggling, I'm journaling. And I was struggling with Filbert. And through a series of, I'll try to make this brief. One thing became crystal clear to me. It's not up to us to determine anybody's timeline of healing or their timeline of grieving, their timeline of repenting. None of my business. Number two, I was talking to a friend about these really hard to answer questions. And he said through his reading and through different philosophers and other readings and stuff, he's come to the conclusion that perhaps with these hard to answer questions, the answer isn't the most important thing. It's our stance while asking the questions. It's our posture. I was really unhappy with Filbert's posture. He didn't look remorseful enough. And when I was talking with my friend and I heard him say that, it's our stance when asking the questions, I flashed right back. My posture was anger. My posture was judgment. My posture was not looking for the good, for sure. And then I thought about, are we always going to define people by one thing? And in many cases, the worst thing. So when I was back with the teachers a month later, after the teachers asked a bunch of questions, they heard the story and everything, I said, Filbert, can I talk to you for a minute? Because I figured in public last time, I kind of went after him with my questions, and people could tell I was not kind by any stretch of the imagination. I was mad. I was judgmental. I said, Filbert, you remember when I was here a month ago? He goes, yeah. And now he's actually looking at the floor and seeming a little more repentant, which maybe wasn't Filbert, maybe that was me. I said, Filbert, I just didn't know if I could trust you last time, anything you were saying. I'll be honest, I didn't like the way you were standing. I didn't think you seemed sorry. And I want to say today that I'm sorry because your posture wasn't the problem. It was my posture of judgment and anger. Filbert shook my hand, and I asked Maria, I wanted to ask her a question, but Maria was way ahead of me. She starts talking in Kinyarwanda, and the translator says, wait a minute, and to me, and Maria finishes her sentence, and she says, Maria says she thinks she understands what you mean by thinking Filbert is proud. And I'm like, okay, I didn't use the word proud, but you're working with the translator, you got to roll with this. She says, Filbert went after the other 8 people who killed my husband and sons, and he wouldn't stop until they confessed. He kept going until they came and apologized to me. I think he's proud of that, she said. And I'm like, oh, Maria. She says, I said, Maria, does Filbert do other stuff that makes you able to be friends? Or I'm just still having a hard time, Maria. Oh my, yes, she says. He brings water for my cow. He helps plant the field and harvesting. I couldn't do that by myself. He's doing things for me like my sons would have done. And I'm thinking right away, well, yeah, if he wouldn't have killed them. You see where I still am. I'm stuck in 94. But Maria is helping me. She puts her hand out on his shoulder and she says, and he does them willingly. See, everything Maria is not missing about defining him now, not the past. And with her hand still on his shoulder, she says, it's wonderful to make somebody beautiful again, and he's beautiful. I said to my wife the other day, I said, I think I really would like to go for a walk with Filbert one day. Because that freedom that Maria exudes, that example, that inspiration, yes, there's a strong precedent. And yes, there's a growing economy and there's opportunities. But without people like Maria, I don't think that country would be where it is today. I didn't mean to kind of give you a little sermon here. Some of you need to take off, and I totally get that. Honestly, you just didn't shoot up about 20 hands, so that's my excuse. You saw I made tapes to Teresa and the kids during the genocide. And so when it ended, I put those tapes in a shoebox, but I was traveling to schools and I had like 60 minutes in an assembly, and the kids were so interested. So I finally got it out and I wrote this book called I'm Not Leaving. Today, I don't know how many I left. Wherever I go to speak at schools, and most of them are public schools, a lot of Catholic schools, other private schools, I leave these on a donation basis for the kids. And I just thought, if you'd like to help with some of the work that we're doing in offering, you're welcome. And if you'd like to take, you're welcome. There's not a big stack. It's on Kindle, so if some of you are Kindle readers and you'd like to read it, that'd be the easiest thing, because I don't have a bunch of books here in South Africa. But I did bring a little higher dose for people who came out on Friday evening than I saved for tomorrow morning's church service. But if you'd like, and if you need to go, please feel free. But I don't know. Is there another question? Or I doubt the 20 hands are going to shoot up at this hour. Or something you'd like to explore. Sometimes I feel like people have been hit by a fire hose, and I get that. Yeah, please. Do I still have contact with the orphans? Some of them. Some have become really good friends. And the director of the orphanage, Damas, I just saw Damas the other evening. If I grab my WhatsApp here and come to Johnson, who was a little kid, he was a 9-year-old at the time. Here's a picture of Damas and Johnson last Friday evening. Damas, I cannot tell you how much I adore and respect that man. He was probably 34 at the time of the genocide. 34, and he's negotiating with those who would kill, for 100 days straight, more or less. And Johnson was 9 years old when he saw his mom get killed. His dad was killed earlier, and he came to the orphanage in the middle of the genocide. Some of them are lawyers now. One is a wedding planner. What else are those kids doing? Health worker. Sandra's a health worker. 3 summers ago when I was there, they planned a surprise party for me. And it was incredible to meet the mothers who have become grandmothers and bringing their grandkids. And yeah, thanks for asking about that. Please.
Some of the rumors we heard was that the church or some of the pastors were also responsible for some of the massacres that took place. Was it real that was a reality?
I don't know. I'm guessing you might know with your proximity to Rwanda. The second largest religion in Rwanda is Seventh-day Adventist. Back at the time of the genocide, there were over 300,000 Seventh-day Adventists in the country, in this little country of about 7 million. Tiny little country, 300,000, an incredible opportunity. Talk about for such a time as this. But the Adventist Church did not distinguish itself as an organization as standing against the genocide. as loving your enemy. Unfortunately, one of our field presidents was convicted by the UN tribunal for his role in the genocide. I worked with him on building schools. I liked the guy. I felt him really workable guy. At the time of the genocide, things were happening. I mean, if I was not a foreigner and somebody did snap a picture of me shaking hands with the genocidal prime minister, what could they have done with that picture? The stories of the genocide are very convoluted with so many layers on them. But tragically, the Adventist church did not distinguish. Some individuals, after the genocide, the church was decimated with leadership either fled or killed. And members were saying, we want this elder to lead. No matter Hutu, Tutsi, he was faithful during the genocide. He was Jesus with skin on. And we would like this one to lead in that. But tragically, as an institution and by and large, you wouldn't tell a difference between an Adventist or any other of the 85% of Rwandans who were in church every weekend. The planners of the genocide had a strategy to get rid of the UN. They had a strategy to get rid of the foreigners to do their work. They seemed not to feel a need for a strategy to deal with the church, except to use its structure for their purposes. And so it's a very, very tragic story. And when Elder Falkenberg came a year and a half after the genocide, and he spoke to that fact, he spoke very honestly of the failure of an organized church to stand against genocide. And that was deeply appreciated in the country. That honesty was very much appreciated. One of the kids from Chicago, he asked a lady in the group in that house where Maria and Filbert were, he asked what about God? And I think I have a picture of the lady here that he asked. I'd like you to look into her face for a minute. And this lady, here she is. This lady said, initially, we felt like God had somehow forgot us. And I don't know what faith she was, what denomination. She's a Christian lady. And then we thought God didn't like us. And then we decided we didn't like God. And fortunately, this kid from Chicago, I don't know what his religious background was. These were 7 kids from the South Side, violent neighborhoods, gangs and stuff. And they'd been studying peace in Chicago, and they wanted to come to Rwanda and study more, the organization that was facilitating their peace studies in the U.S. And this kid fortunately said, and what about today? And the lady looked at him and she says, we got so lonely, we finally decided to try God again. And some people decided to try God again in a Catholic church where they had been a Protestant, or in a Protestant church where they'd been Catholic. They probably estimate Adventists now in Rwanda are well over 900,000. They expect by the end of the year to have been right at, if not close to 1 million members. The church is growing. The question is, why did the church fail? And I don't have a clean or simple answer, but as I've wrestled with this question myself, because I had a lot of anger against the American government, I had anger against the church, and I don't know, I hope I don't come across tonight as an angry guy. I think I am journeying through this anger, but anger has a way of hiding and kind of going sub for a while, and then something brings it out and you don't even realize it. So now that honestly is my prayer. In fact, it's just clicking right now in my head because I have been praying to God, reveal my anger, God. And I didn't realize until now, telling you, that's what he did with Filbert this summer. He revealed that anger that was still there in me. And, oh shoot, what were we talking about? The church, oh yeah, and anger, and, oh yeah, okay, so this is my best take on the church and genocide. if you look at a bar graph like we used to do in math, the two towering bars on any bar graph for religion, from my perspective, have to be connecting with your source, with good, or as Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. Those have to be the two highest bars on the graph. If any other bars on any religion's journey come anywhere near, instead of feeding into those bars, but they come anywhere near of having lives of their own, then I think we can participate in genocide. And you can figure out what some of those other bars might be in any religion or in the Adventist religion. So that's one thing that seems pretty clear to me, that without any hesitation, I need to see and others need to see that pursuit of the Father and of loving our neighbor have to be way, way, way above any other bar. That's my thoughts about religion and the genocide. Please.
Since you've already answered part of my question, which was, I suppose you've dealt with a lot of anger issues.
Sorry, I didn't catch the first part.
You've already answered a part of my question, which I had regarding anger issues. The anger issues, were it quite prominent in the period afterwards? And how did you actually go about to deal with it? And then my next...
Now, are you talking community anger or my anger, or both?
Basically both, but the whole situation that was occurring and where was God? Why? How? And also the second remark was maybe Philbert, could he have been a scapegoat for some of your anger?
Oh, big time. Big time. When you find someone to focus on, it was like so many. I have another story of a guy I won't get into this evening that I ran across. Well, okay, you saw the orphanage surrounded. The leader of that killing squad, I stumbled on him 2016 in prison. I was with another group of students. Once again, that was my first time to really come face to face with the ugliest anger I had inside. I mean, I was angry at America, and I felt like I processed through that. Angry at the UN, well, I more processed through that in 2017, I think. But I met this leader of the killing squad in 2000 in prison, and oh my, I asked a series of questions till I was sure he was the guy. And then I couldn't believe how angry, and my processing of that one, different than with Philbert. I went back to my room that evening after meeting Gregoire. They say that Gregoire, in fact, I was surprised. In Johannesburg, at the Holocaust Center, they have a permanent exhibition on the Rwandan genocide, and they got Gregoire's picture in the Holocaust Center there, as one of the perpetrators. And I was surprised to see his picture a couple days ago when I was in Johannesburg. But I think I stuck it in this folder. There he is. And I understood he and his gang were maybe responsible for 2,000 people. They were saying their research indicated 12,000 people. And I met him, and I couldn't believe what was inside and I just felt like vomiting. I got back to my room that night. I had a Skype appointment with Teresa, my wife. It was not great internet, so it was just audio. And she says, "Hey, how was your day?" Because every day something new in Rwanda. And I go, "This was horrible, Teresa. I met the guy who killed Johnson, one of the orphans who I've become really good friends with, killed his mother. And though he didn't kill that day at the orphanage, so many other, I said, I don't even want to say his name. He doesn't deserve a name." And I was really struggling. And Teresa's an amazing listener. She's not a fixer. And she wasn't talking about you should or anything. That would have just made me worse. But she's like, "I'm sorry. I wish I was there. That's got to be hard." And after about 30 minutes of some silence and some crying and some wrestling, I go, "Wait a minute. I know what I got to do." And I I started reciting to her 5 things that I had developed in my journaling and stuff to center myself, to get right. When you get knocked flat, to get recentered again. I started reciting these, and I actually have it here because the other day I was talking to the kids at King's College in Johannesburg about this story, and I started writing them out for the kids there at King's College, and yeah. Oh, okay, don't look for a minute. Because you'll get ahead of the story. But you probably already figured it out. And I guess we're so short tonight, we could be ahead of the story. But I started typing out to the kids, these are the 5 things that center me over the last 6 or 7 years. God's always with me. I know that sounds simple, but that is like so foundational. God takes great delight in me, not because of what I do, but because I'm his child. Although I have a lot of neural pathways that say God and behavior are really connected, so I'm dealing with a lot of that too, but the real reason God takes delight in me is not, I can't do anything, you've heard that, huh? Nothing to make him love you more, nothing to make him love you less. God's love calms my heart. God has everything I need. Can you read those? That's kind of small, huh? God has everything I need for every situation, and together we're going to make it. Even if we don't live, we're going to make it. And then something clicked as I was reciting these to Teresa that night in my guest room. And I went on, number 5, God's my Redeemer, God's my Shepherd. The click between 4 and 5 was, if these things are true for me, they have to be true for Gregoire. Everybody. And so I went back and I started reframing, and I started, as you saw earlier, typing in Gregoire. The first one was easy, huh? Anybody pretty much could say that. I mean, you might even feel like you're a better person for saying that. But the second one was a real problem, because I still had the pathways in my head about behavior. I could not imagine God taking delight in this man who had led people to the murder of so many thousands of people. You just can't tell me that when I have a pathway that connects God's delight, God's love with behavior. But if you reframe that pathway, and it is not, and I'm not saying behavior is not important, don't misunderstand me here. Because when we're in this love relationship, that drives our behavior. And so I felt like for a year, I substituted Gregoire's name in there. And a year later, I came back and I felt like I'm ready to talk to Gregoire. And I went to the prison and I met him in the warden's office, and we had a translator. He spoke French, but he preferred not to, and I was ready to respect that. Although the first time when I was speaking French and he answered me in French a couple times, then he quit speaking French, that just made me even more angry. But a lovely lady who was our host, Lillian, in the prison, she came up behind Gregoire that first time. She put her hands on his shoulders as if he was her uncle or something, and she started translating in Kinyarwanda my questions to him. So he's looking at the floor and he's answering her while I'm going after the questions to find out, is this really the guy who it was back then? We have another translator now and another really caring person. And she, understand this, when this young lady was standing behind him, and I said she was talking to him like an uncle, treating him like an uncle. This is kind of one of my core tools to really keep me straight in life. Everybody wants purpose and community. Those are enormous needs in all of our lives. And to keep those healthy, I look at the pathway of respect. If we have an environment of respect, I can learn your story and empathy can begin to grow. And when empathy begins to grow, I'm like, really? I want you to come meet my wife. Come home. Inclusion becomes very natural. It's not forced. This idea of respect, empathy, and inclusion is, and this lady, Lillian, She was living it as she put her hands on his shoulder, respectfully, empathetically, inclusively, and she translated for him. And finally, I said to him that first encounter, "Do you recognize me?" And he looked up and he says to her, in Kinyarwanda, "Well, there was this Catholic priest who was bringing water to the orphans." I'm like, okay, so much for good Adventist PR. I said, "Well, I'm not a priest, but that was me." I encounter him a year later after really working to reframe him through these 5 things that we were talking earlier. And I said, "Gregoire, when I was here a year ago, I was really angry." And he said, "I could tell." He said, "I actually recognized you when I first walked in the room. I was happy to see that you were still alive. I've thought of you. I've thought of you often over the years. And I thought to myself, I thought I was ready." But he's saying stuff that doesn't fit in my head because I still fire that one pathway, Gregoire the mass murderer. You see, there's this danger of one thing thinking, that I get trapped in that trap of one thing thinking. And I said, "Gregoire, I don't want to be angry." I don't know if this was his way of confessing. He said, "We tried to stop you, discourage you again and again, but you kept coming until finally we decided to kill you. But it wasn't God's will." And then I'm like, oh, no, you cannot talk about God's will. Huh? I don't have a pathway for that. But it's not, when we pray, "Have this mind in you that's in Christ." Do I understand what that prayer is? Have this mind, have these neural pathways that are Christ. And we finish little visit there. I stand up to shake his hand, and I really should have seen it coming because Rwandans are such huggers. But I'm in an embrace. And it doesn't feel awkward. It doesn't feel weird. It feels really good. And as we step back and he's wiping his eyes with his prison uniform and I'm wiping my eyes, the thought is coming to me, I can't tell Johnson about this. I just hugged the guy who ordered the death of his mother and a bunch of neighbors and all. That seems like I've betrayed Johnson and I've betrayed all of these people who were killed. And it was almost a year later, finally in my journaling, that I wrote down, is that really betraying the people who died, their legacy? And in my journal, I wrote, what if I would have been killed and my kids would have come in contact with the person who killed me and they found a way to be free from anger and bitterness? I try a lot of times not to talk about forgiveness because it's so loaded with so many different things for different people. Maria's story is a real challenging one too, because Maria hasn't just gotten free from anger and resentment, but Maria has moved into a whole new life. And that isn't what everybody is going to do who gets free of anger and bitterness. And I think we need to understand that. But getting free of anger, I said, if my kids met the guy and they got free of anger and bitterness, would I be like, oh, you guys, what, you don't care about your father? Absolutely not. I would be so proud of them because they would have stopped that chain of violence and harm and destruction. I'm going to let you go here. If you want to stick around for a little bit up front here, come on up. We can have a conversation after with any who want to stick a little longer. If you want, don't feel these are not selling. If you just want to take a book and whether you make a donation or not, that's totally up to you. There's a website in the back. If you wanted to make a donation and you didn't have anything tonight, you could do that. But it's Kindle and that's a little easier. This is actually what you just watched tonight. And so, can I pray? I'm sure I can, huh? You're not going to say no. Will you stand up with me, please? Father, whoa. When I write those words, good morning, Father, dear Father, you never cease to transport me into this place of your presence. I was kind of embarrassed to admit how I wanted to crop Filbert out of the picture in the presence of Maria. But what about your presence? I am so grateful for your never-ending love, your never-ending patience. I'm so grateful for the Holy Spirit's conviction and comforting and instructing. I am so inspired by the life of Jesus. I thank you for the way you reveal yourself through people like those neighbor ladies, people like Gasikwa with a couple of chickens in his hand, and the way you revealed yourself through Maria and through Filbert, through Gregoire. I don't think I've said that before. I thank you for the journey that you are so faithful in leading us on. I thank you for bringing us together here this evening in your house. I thank you for the fact that you know exactly what's going on in each one of our lives. I thank you that you can work with plan A or plan B or plan C or plan C, D as we so often make choices that are, well, let me just speak for myself, choices that are selfish or protective or playing it safe. We thank you that you don't give up, but you continue to shepherd us. We thank you for the Sabbath here. We thank you for a chance to reset, to recenter, to reclaim the promises and the hope that you have for us. We ask your forgiveness for losing sight at different points, taking the reins and thinking that, well, again, let me speak for myself, that I somehow know better, or I just really want to know what true, complete surrender means. And I want to rest and I want to revel in that surrender. We love you, Lord, with all of our hearts. We believe, but we also trust you to help our unbelief. And we pray too, Lord, for our families this evening. You know what's closest in our heart. And maybe for some, there's some relationships that need to be repaired. And we trust that you can do that. And for others, we just need to say a little more often, or maybe a lot more often, how much we love and treasure the family you've given us. And that's not just our blood family, but that's our human family. That's our global family. We pray for those this evening who are not comfortable with full stomachs and living in peace right now. And we pray for you to show us how we can have a part in being light, being salt to those people. We love you. We want to walk with you. And we thank you because of Jesus. We're praying with confidence. Amen.